Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of our Employment First Work to Include Summit. My name is Pat Rogan, and I serve as co-director of this initiative with Susan Rinney, and we are so pleased to have you join us. I hope most of you were able to join us yesterday in our wonderful day 1 presentations and discussions, and that you will also come back tomorrow afternoon for another packed, wonderful agenda of great information and conversations as we plan ahead for Indiana. Without further ado, we are going to get underway. This is what our afternoon looks like together. We're going to begin with some amazing presentations about why change, spoken from the hearts and minds of our various team leaders for our Work to Include Coalition. And then we're going to talk about the focus of today's session, and that's on organizational transformation or organizational change. We're going to hear from speakers from Vermont, one of the leading states in our country around organizational transformation, followed by hearing about some Indiana success stories. And with all of that information, then we're going to move you into breakout room discussions so that you can examine what is in place right now in Indiana, think about and share the ideas that you gained through the national perspectives today, national and state perspectives, and then make some recommendations for where Indiana should go from here. And you will have some feedback that you will send to us through your session facilitators and through a survey that we will have you take. And then we'll wrap up the day and end by 4:30. All of you are muted right now, and we're going to keep you muted throughout the presentations, but we'll unmute you during the breakout conversations. So we will have Q&A sessions after the major presentations, and you will submit your questions in the chat room on Zoom. If any of you are interested in getting copies of all of the presentations from our summit, day 1, 2, and 3, those will be posted at our Work to Include website after the summit. Many thanks to all of our sponsors and our hosts. And we are grateful to the Governor's Planning Council for People with Disabilities for funding the Employment First initiative for Indiana, and in particular to Christine Dahlberg, the Executive Director, for her leadership and incredible support and personal involvement in Employment First. Thanks to Indiana APSE. Employment for All is really their middle name, and we have benefited from and so appreciate that partnership. Thanks also to IUPUI and the School of Ed, where this initiative is being hosted, and My Employment Home. Also, really special thanks to Karen Reese and Kelsey Daniel, who are behind the scenes experts around technology, and thank you for all of the support from IU conferences. So first up, why change? We're going to hear first from Lauren Pilcher, followed by Mark Hubler, Bonnie Homer, and Jeff Shearer. But without further ado, Lauren, take it away.
All right, thank you guys so much. My name is Lauren Pilcher. I help run a company in Southern Indiana dedicated to serving folks with developmental disabilities. And I want to thank you all today for attending and opening your minds to the possibilities and opportunities that true change can bring. It's time that we not only preach inclusion in Indiana, but actively practice it by getting rid of segregated settings like sheltered workshops and focusing solely on community employment. Inclusion is a right, not a privilege. As we will hear today, other states have found a way down the path of revolutionary change, and if they can do it, us Hoosiers can too. By restricting work opportunities to just one isolated setting, we are limiting the potential and possibility of thousands of Hoosiers with disabilities. People like my friend Mark here, who fortunately had the determination to not let others limit his talent to sub-minimum wage and piecework. Before throwing it over to Mark, I just want to remind everyone as we begin the discussion on organizational change that if you don't have folks with disabilities at the table and leading the way, your organization will never truly change. Thanks, guys. Mark?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Joseph Hubler. I am 56 years old. I lived on my own since I was 24 years old. I paid my own bills. I started working at a central workshop when I was 19 years of my age. And I worked there for 3 years. I quit working at the central workshop because I wanted to be just like my brothers. And someday I have enough money to live on my own, going to college, and getting married. And plus, I'm still single. I wanted to do everything that my brothers were doing. I needed a real job and a real pay. So I couldn't live on a full life and just like my brothers. I left the workshop and got a real job with real pay. I am now a college graduate. I am a motivational speaker now. I have my own business, Mark J. Hubler, Hublar. Yeah, okay. I lived on my own and paid my own bills. Now I am just like my brothers, but I am still single. All of my friends who are still in the central workshops can do everything that I am doing. And they are just given the opportunity to get a real job with real pay. I did it, and they can do it too. We all just need a chance. Please look at our abilities, but not our disabilities. Thank you for your ROI, respecting me, including me, giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. You can buy my book. It's called A Miracle Named by Mark. My website, markjhublerspeaks.com. And you can find my book that way. For $20 plus shipping and handling. It's a story about my miracle named by Mark. Thank you, everybody.
Preach, Mark. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I love the ROI, Mark. Awesome. Thank you, Lauren, as well, for those inspiring words to kick us off today. Perfect. Next, we're going to hear from Bonnie Bomer, who is the team leader for our coalition in Indianapolis. Bonnie?
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you. I did not put my picture on my computer because every time I do, I lose my large print, and it just makes it difficult. But I would like to thank you for listening to me as I explained to you that when I first became a case manager or social worker, I started working in a sheltered workshop. I was basically helping clients there to maintain their employment and their living situations. A coworker and I decided to try to encourage people from the workshop to start working in the community. Some folks were successful, some weren't. But we did this in 1980s, 1986 to 1989. I was involved in helping advocate for the passage of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're still struggling years later with low expectations and low success in employment for people with disabilities. So my pitch today, my encouragement today is for us to consider the potential and the opportunities and the all that we have to offer as people with disabilities within our communities, within our homes, within our neighborhoods, within our businesses that we frequent. We would like the opportunity to be regularly employed, productive citizens, and we encourage you to allow us to do that. You'll be amazed at what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. And you are walking the walk, as is Mark. Bonnie is working at Indiana Disability Rights. That was fantastic, Bonnie. Thank you. And next we have Jeff Shearer, who's an absolutely amazing team leader from Fort Wayne, Indiana. Jeff? I am not seeing Jeff. So we may circle back to Jeff when and if and when he jumps on. So I am going to take a little bit of walk down memory lane with you right now to frame the issues, talk with you, think with you about where we've come from and where we're going, and get us set to hear about how other states have moved forward more quickly and more successfully than Indiana, and learn from those states, and also learn from an exemplary program here in Indiana. So I'm going to take a walk down memory lane, as I said, and I appreciate you thinking with me for those of you who have been in the field, let's say since the 70s, and have actually lived through the evolution of Public Law 94-142, or IDEA, if you've been on the school side of things, or through all of our amazing federal legislation, the Rehab Act, now WIOA, the ADA, the Supreme Court's Olmstead decision, and more, and have experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly of our system that supports individuals with disabilities. I'm a professor at IUPUI in the School of Ed, and as I said earlier, co-directing this initiative with my partner in crime, Susan Rennie. I'm just going to switch screens on you here real quickly. And here we go. So my early education was shaped by this young man, Joe, in the 1970s. Some of my earliest experiences were being introduced to individuals who were institutionalized and working to get them the heck out of there. Institutions and large congregated, segregated settings will never be a home. This young man was uprooted from his family in Milwaukee, sent to an institution in Madison, Wisconsin, away from his family, disconnected from his family support system. His family could not access the community supports in Milwaukee to keep him at home as he grew older and larger. And they could not meet his needs and could not get come-in support, in-home support. So back in the day, they were advised to send him away to institutions. Joe taught me a major lesson in my career as I got to know him. And it was abhorrent that he was laying in a crib when he was in his early 20s. And so a team of individuals in Madison worked to get him out of there. So that was my first lesson around 1975, that this notion of a continuum of services, whether you look at the living side of it or the work side of it, it is faulty. It does not work. And on the work side of it, at some point, somebody thought that you needed to start in the most segregated setting, let's say day activity centers, and earn your way through the hoops to get to the real world, to sheltered workshops, to be in there for decades. Finally, maybe you get to an enclave or work crew out in the community. And then maybe by the time you're retirement age, you would finally get a real job in the real world with real wages. So Steve Taylor, back then, wrote a brilliant piece called Caught in the Continuum, a critical analysis of the principle of least restrictive environment, and really challenged our systems thinking around all of these hoops that we make people jump through to get into the real world. Well, Joe taught us that is all for naught. He could move directly out of an institution into his own apartment in the community with support. And he had live-in roommates that provided support, similar to Bob Lawhead's son in Colorado. And he had come-in support as well to relieve some of the roommates that lived with him and had some time off. And once there, his world was opened up in terms of all of the opportunities within his home to be his own person. And because all of us in the country spend our days in workplaces, or most of us anyway, and we earn a wage and find meaning through that work, and we find social connections and professional affiliations and continue to grow our own skill repertoires. That's where Joe wanted to be during the day. But we ask ourselves, did he need to jump through those hoops? Did he need to start in a day activity center because he has high support needs? Joe had never worked a day in his life. Does that mean he needed to go to a segregated setting to learn to work? Absolutely not. The best place to teach individuals the real world of work is in the real world of work. The other lesson that we learned is that becoming a member of the community means you must be not only physically present, but of the community. We have a lot of people who are physically present, but they are not integrally involved. They are not integrated in participating. So that meant widening the circle of support and having Joe become a regular at the coffee shop or down at the corner bookstore or at his favorite restaurant or pub, so that he grew that circle of people who knew him, called him by name, and he was a regular in those environments, not a temporary now and then visitor. So that whole model of traditional services based in facilities where people are congregated and segregated began falling away in our understanding back in the day. We did not need to get ready. No need to jump through the hoops. No, the whole deficit perspective of what's wrong with you and what must be fixed and remedied in a segregated setting before you earned your way into the community fell to the wayside as we learned and used person-centered planning methods such as PATH and personal futures planning, where we centered the conversations around each unique individual and their strengths and their gifts and talents and their desires and their needs for support. So I started in special education as a teacher during the era of Lou Brown, who just passed away, sadly. And having individuals move out of institutions into our public schools, move out of segregated schools into inclusive schools and classrooms, and begin to get on with their life in our communities. So here's Brenda. When I was a transition coordinator, Brenda taught me that it really does need to be school to work. No stopping off in a segregated environment or facility. No having to earn your way. You go right into the real world of work if that was part of that transition plan. And of course, individuals back then had very limited access to post-secondary education, and fortunately that has changed. And so we got Brenda a job at the city clerk's office, and 25 years later, she was earning kudos from the mayor and having award ceremonies for her 25-year anniversary. And every step of the way, she grew in her skills and her responsibilities and her network there at the city clerk's office. Did we introduce sub-minimum wage to pay Brenda, even though she was still learning to work at the point of transition? Of course not. Employers don't speak sub-minimum wage. Of course they offer to pay her minimum wage. And of course that grew over the years that she was there. So the lessons learned is that we prepare students through their K-12 education and their transition years for the real world, and we move directly to the real world, and we do not fill segregated settings. So I moved to Syracuse University and worked with fantastic people like Brian Daigle, who you'll hear from shortly. And we undertook the of moving people out of a segregated workshop into the real world of work. So Brian knows this young man who was called Bobby in the segregated workshop. He'd been there for over a decade. His file said he had to do this, that, and the other thing, this, that, and the other thing. Here he is doing make work tasks in the photo on the left, often nonsense work that didn't need to be done, paid pennies for his time, earned peanuts, and kind of was in a day wasted mode for all those years. And snap our fingers and boom, boom, boom. It was a very short time that we got Robert a job at the university. And he stood tall and he worked well in multiple roles and responsibilities, including mail delivery. And he got on with his life. And once he had that job, then he wanted to upgrade his living situation as well. So don't need to go to a workshop either. So as we moved ahead with the evolution of supported employment and later customized employment strategies, we helped people in service delivery roles to learn what to do for exemplary or effective practices. And instead of grouping people, which often is our tendency, and I always wonder, why do we do that? Why do we always want to group people? All of the supports, all of the planning needs to be individualized and person-centered. We used to just stuff people into programs, regardless of your gifts and talents and your interests. We just stuff them into a segregated program and say, hey, these are the tasks we have. These are our subcontracts. You have to do it whether you like it or not. And it just didn't work for so many people. So again, person-centered, customized. Our headset was always, kind of a medical model when I first entered the field, and we still have those remnants that there's something wrong with the person and we need to fix it, a kind of a focus on deficits. And we know time and again, people have exceeded our expectations time and again. And we don't need all of those special places, as we call them, special places. And, we're still building them. We're still building special places in mass for people to go just with others with disabilities. And we know that our community has the ability and the need and the interest to be part of individuals' lives through so-called natural supports. So the young lady pictured in this slide is Maddie. Maddie is both deaf and blind, and here she's working at the state office building doing a variety of clerical tasks. So innovation must also tap into assistive technology. And we are just ripping it up in terms of the opportunities for people to be working. Certainly COVID has brought that to the forefront, using a variety of tools. So whether it be Rob using a head switch to activate a stamping jig or a shredding machine, or using simple plexiglass cylinders to bag bulk items at a food co-op, or as I said, Maddie using a simple jig to help her locate the corner or the center of her envelopes to stamp or put the return addresses. And then we got off and running and supported entrepreneurship or self-employment. And we had great success with people all over the country. And Mark Hubular is one example of an individual who wants to be self-employed. And Mark as a public speaker and consultant. And that is an option that should be open to all individuals. So with Brian Daig, with Steve Murphy, and with an amazing group of people, Mary Held, Nancy Kalina, Valerie McNichol, and others, we captured the lessons we had learned through closing the Pioneer in Syracuse, New York, in this book called Closing the Shop. And so we know how to transform or convert, to change organizations and to support them to do so, to let go of that outdated model of segregated practices and congregating people with disabilities in facilities. And we know how to help transform that organization so that people can have integrated, inclusive lives in the community. So we've known for a long time how to do this, and we know that people with disabilities want it. And here in our own state, back in 2015, Alberto Migliori with David Mank, Teresa Grassi, and myself did an extensive study here in Indiana, with interviewing people with disabilities in sheltered facilities, talking with their families, talking with the service providers. And the majority, 74%, wanted to try a job in the community. So what are we waiting for? Why haven't we made that happen? Because we know that work provides a better quality life, and we know that employers benefit from this talent work pool. So what has been pushing us outside of the people at facilities around the country who have had leadership within the organization, executive directors who know it's the right thing to do, staff working in those facilities that have seen the transformation of individuals once they've moved out into the community. In addition to those internal impetus for change, there's been a lot of movement externally through federal and state initiatives and mandates to move people into regular lives in the community. And certainly the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Policy through the HCB, Home and Community-Based Waiver, have made this a priority, that commitment to integrated employment. And through WIOA, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, we also see the clear impetus, clear mandate to shift services and through PREETs to prepare people while they're in public education or K-12 education for the real world, no stopping at segregated settings. Some of the other movements underway are like, sometimes you have to use a bit of the hammer. And the US Department of Justice has done that, applying the Olmstead decision, that Supreme Court decision that said we must provide services in the most integrated setting, and the Americans with Disabilities Act also. And they are saying, no can do, it's got to be moving into the community and no more segregation. And then, of course, as Lauren said, the voices of people with disabilities, Bonnie and Mark saying self-advocates, it's our lives, our voices, whose life is it anyway? And let's get out of sub-minimum wages in these facilities. So speaking of the U.S. Department of Justice, and they're slapping the wrist of Rhode Island not too long ago, that was a landmark agreement that's basically saying, as a state, you are in the wrong, get going. And so all states are under the lens of the Department of Justice right now, especially states like Indiana, who are at the lower end of the continuum in terms of outcomes for community integrated employment. And we're so grateful to the U.S. Department of Labor and the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP, for their leadership on Employment First. And they have invested heavily in helping states at the state level to transform their systems, their models of service delivery for individuals with disabilities. So we will hear from Vermont, but we also know that they are no longer the only state in the country that is not funding facility-based programs. More states are joining in to defund sheltered workshops and to put all their money in the buckets of community integrated employment and community living. So those many organizational change examples across the country have positioned us now to say, no, but it can be done. Of course, there's examples all over of how to do it. And we know people want it. So in essence, there's no excuse. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the actual organizational change strategies that we've learned about. And Susan and I wrote an article back in 2011. So think about that. It's been 10 years, called The National Call for Organizational Change from Shelter to Integrated Employment. And we interviewed leaders from organizations all over the country, 10 leaders who had already undertaken that organizational change process and had transformed their organizations, to learn what were the unique and also the common strategies that they used for this changeover process. So it goes without saying that they have to change their whole service delivery system and model. And that has many implications for how they hire and train staff and how they move out of their facility and get rid of their building, and how they work with businesses out in the community rather than bringing contract work inside, and how they wrote those job descriptions and how that whole HR side of things worked. And then, okay, thanks for that. And so specifically, as we think about that changeover process, we culled it into these top 10 tips, and we hope that that's something that you all can take away with you today. So those include flattening the organizational structure, restructuring your organization. And as I said, rewriting job descriptions to support working in the community and working in individualized fashions, and also working in small teams in the community, because once you're out and about, you need to have ways that you can support each other as staff and connect with each other in the community. And we knew that we had to invest heavily, as these other organizations did, on staff development, learning all of those exemplary or best practices that we spoke of earlier, and empowering that frontline staff to be in decision-making roles rather than that top-down organizational structure that is common within facilities. We learned that organizations moving to that one person at a time focus, they often started with those who had the most significant impact of disabilities, individuals who had the highest support needs, so that once they could demonstrate the success there, then it became easier for staff to buy in and for others within the facility to say, I want that. I want a job in the community. And then it's that process of building out the day from the moment the person wakes up to the moment they go to sleep. And what would that look like? Where are they doing what and with whom? And when some people that may not start out in a full-time job, we found, and they demonstrated that working 2 part-time jobs often was a really nice option for individuals. Allocating the sunk costs, meaning all of the costs that went into a building, its upkeep, its maintenance, its rents, whatever, could be redirected to support community-based, so that selling or leasing, renting out that space worked really well for many organizations, and totally changing their whole marketing focus from, send us subcontract work to our facility to, no, we've got, a viable labor source here, and we want to partner with you, the business community. So that connecting with the community was a huge piece of their transformation, connecting with all of those entities that are or could be in support roles for people once they are working in the community. And so those strategic plans were only as good as the actions that were taken. They had to be more than the paper they were written on. So once the plans were in place, that constant revisiting of working the plan was really key. They also closed entry into the front doors. No longer were people being taken into the facility, they were only moving out, and that continued to shrink the size of the in-house population. And certainly, as I said earlier, school to work versus school to facility helped to reduce those numbers. And as always, the notion of what you count counts comes into play. Tracking the data, tracking the outcomes, wages, hours, growth, movement within positions or job growth, wage increases, getting benefits. All of those aspects of employment were really important to keep an eye on, to track, and to make an assessment of, are we making the progress that we hoped for in real time? And then, as I said, those partnerships, we have often had business leadership networks in various states. So it's the business community whose voice is front and center in saying, we benefit from this workforce. And let me tell you how we best support our workers with disabilities. And that notion of having people's benefits jeopardized is really problematic. And that's going to be the focus of our summit day tomorrow. So I won't say much about that. So I am going to move us to thinking about, well, where are we now in Indiana and where do we need to go? And that's going to be your conversation later today. So kudos to our Indiana Disability Rights Employment Team, who back in 2016 trekked around the state, visiting 75% of Indiana's sheltered workshops, interviewing 140 people with disabilities and documenting what they said about being in workshops. And some of the things they said, including things they were not happy about in the facilities. Poor pay, especially sub-minimum wage, which is really a violation of one's civil rights. The segregation aspect, the fact, as I said earlier, they had very narrow options for work, and sometimes there was no work. They did make work, they did nonsense work. And often the environment was not comfortable for them. Loud and noisy, perhaps for people who are noise sensitive, constricted for those who might have mobility issues, and more. And shockingly, the accounting of workplace injuries. So look at this. 43 of our CRPs as of 2017 were paying over 4,400 Hoosiers sub-minimum wages through the 14C certificates. And that too will be another conversation for us as we move forward. So take a look at this graph. Clearly, if you can see this arrow right here pointing to where Indiana is, this little red bar, look at us, how close to the bottom of the country we are in integrated employment outcomes And this is for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The mean is right here with the green bar in the center. And you can see the number of states that are ahead of us in terms of competitive integrated employment outcomes. And in hearing from Kelsey Linville yesterday, who heads our DMHA, Department of Division of Mental Health and Addiction in Indiana, she quoted a 75% unemployment rate for people with mental health issues. So we have a major catch-up challenge right now in our state to move us forward. And I would hope in the not too distant future, we will move right to the head of the line in this data for all individuals with disabilities, because our work to include coalition is cross-disability. So here we are, a persistently low employment rate, persistently high unemployment rate, 37.3% of Hoosiers with disabilities employed compared to about 76% without disabilities. And that was pre-COVID. And this is according to John Butterworth and Company's research in 2017, their state data. And if you look at the investment in people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and the amount of money that Indiana spends, 90.2% in facility-based and non-work services, and just a very small percentage of our funding going to integrated employment. So the COVID pandemic has really impacted employment for individuals with disabilities. So this graph from the Kessler Foundation, shared through AUCD, the Association of University Centers on Excellence, and the University of New Hampshire, goes all the way back to the 2008 recession. And you can see those variations, the ebbs and flow of employment outcomes for people without disabilities is the top graph line in blue, and people with disabilities, the lower graph line, and showing those dips. And on the right, as of March 2021, we see that huge drop through the pandemic in 2020 in employment of people with disabilities. It's shocking, isn't it? People with disabilities, and if you look at the intersections of people with disabilities who have other intersecting identities, people of color and females and so forth, we have a huge climb out of that hole. We're up to 71.5% unemployed right now, but that's still shockingly low compared to about 29.6% overall in our country. So that participation rate outcome right now must change as we head forward with our employment first. So I'm going to wrap with a call to action. And this is what we're all about. This is why we're here today in our summit. These are reflected in our state employment first plan that you will once again take a peek at this afternoon before your breakout sessions. And it all is exactly what we need to do, aligning those state policies and practices, making sure we have a state employment first office and strong presence as we move forward, making sure our transition outcomes are robust and inclusive, shifting funding to community-based and incentivizing community integrated employment, building the business leadership network, especially those organizations that are leading the way in employing people with disabilities, tracking our data and our outcomes and using those for decision-making, providing ongoing training and technical assistance as we invest in the various stakeholders in their professional development, moving forward with exemplary, innovative benefits planning, and making sure we have accessible, affordable, and reliable transportation options to get people to and from work. So one of my favorite all-time sayings is this: those who say it can't be done should get out of the way of those who are doing it. As I said, this is a call to action, And if not now, then when? If not us, then who? So I want you to think about some questions that you might have as we move into our speakers. But I know that our great buddy, Jeff Shearer, is in the wings, and I think Jeff is ready to share with us. Jeff, are you on board? Jeff Shearer?
Pat, we're trying to get him to unmute. Hey, Jeff, can you unmute? There we go. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Jeff, way to go. Take it away, bud.
Before I have since I have since I have since strategies to share with all of you. The first is we need everybody to get involved. I know it's important. I have had about 8 code members, but those members which are in the community, the science, say we need everybody to be in it, innovative, and the state of India. We are good, we are good at innovation. And the third, the third is being creative, because you uh, you need to be creative, especially in light of COVID. We need to seize the opportunity around remote work. Another thing we need to do is you can never have to be alive, and everybody needs to be community oriented, because work affects all of us. As Bob said this yesterday, and the last thing I will leave with all of you is don't forget to have fun, because if you don't enjoy what you do, you don't put in much effort into it. So those are some of the strategies that we implemented in my community. I look forward to talking to you guys in the breakout. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. Jeff provides just amazing leadership as his team leader. Thank you for all you're doing to move and shake. And thanks for Susan for posting Jeff's talking points in the chat room in terms of getting people involved, needing to be patient, being innovative and community oriented. And good job, Jeff, with this tip. You can never have too many allies, and also have fun doing this, right? So many celebrations and rewards as we see people's lives transform in the community. Well done. Well done. Well, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I am so excited to welcome and introduce our team from Vermont.
Okay.
So joining us here today are Dr. Brian Daig, James Smith, and Jenny Masterson from Vermont. And Brian has worked, he's one of my former master's students, I have to say that. And he was so fun to work with at Syracuse University and on our pioneer work. So you're amazing, Brian. But Brian has worked at the University of Vermont Center on Disability and Community Inclusion for over 25 years. You can't be that old, Brian. Providing training and technical assistance in the areas of supported employment and transition for people with disabilities. He provides training and consulting on the conversion of sheltered workshops to community-based employment in the United States and nationally. And Vermont received international recognition by the Zero Project with an award for innovative policy for their work on inclusive employment of people with disabilities. James Smith is the Deputy Director of the Vermont Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And in this role, he oversees the division's operations and policies. Mr. Smith directs a number of special programs for DVR, including linking learning to careers, a work-based learning demonstration for students with disabilities. And he has a long history of involvement in initiatives to support SSDI beneficiaries return to work. Prior to joining DVR, James worked for 10 years in the supported employment arena in Vermont and New York City. And Jenny Masterson is Vermont's supported employment coordinator and post-secondary ed services coordinator at Developmental Disability Services Division. She provides mentoring and technical assistance to local employment teams in areas related to quality, professional development, capacity building, and funding to improve and expand supported employment and post-secondary ed opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Previous to her work with the state, Jenny managed an integrated supported employment program. So what a team. I am going to hand the baton over to you three gurus. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Pat. I'm going to share my screen here. I hope this works. Is that visible to everybody? Great. So I'm Brian Daig. I'm with the University of Vermont. What I'm going to do first is kind of go through a quick, a fast 40-year history of services in Vermont, and then turn it over to Jenny and James so they can talk more about what's going on now. So Vermont's path, one of the questions I get asked all the time is like, when did Vermont decide to close sheltered workshops? And to the best of my knowledge, there was never such a meeting or discussion about that. It was just kind of a pretty generic organic process with the advent of supported employment. So we did have sheltered workshops, about 1,400 people in sheltered workshops, and our designated agencies, which are basically by county in Vermont. And in 1979, 1980, it was really strong leadership from the University of Vermont and state of Vermont that looked at this brand new concept of supported employment. And a pilot study was started in 1980 in Barre, Vermont, and that was Bill Ash that had done that. And it was Susan Azazi and Tim Vogelsberg at the University of Vermont. They were really kind of instrumental in getting this started. But we also had incredible leadership at the state level at that time. So we had a good start, in this process. So the pilot study was successful. Bill Ash was able to move about 70 people from sheltered work into employment in Barre, Vermont. Not that it was an easy process, but he was able to do that. And then that program was replicated throughout the state. So eventually the 14 counties all developed and built a supported employment program. And as those supported employment programs grew and were successful, people from shelter workshops were moved into employment. So a lot of the sheltered workshops just sort of closed kind of organically. And then there were different restrictions placed on funding, which Jenny will talk more about in a bit. Our state institution closed in 1993, and then 2002 was the last sheltered workshop in Vermont to officially close. A lot of this done was really partnerships, like I mentioned, with the University of Vermont and the state of Vermont. So we had strong collaboration with folk rehab, developmental disabilities, and the University of Vermont. That was since the late 70s, early 80s, and then when the federal grants came in mid 1980s, it was a very collaborative project, to work together on these initiatives. And then in 1994, Green Mountain Self Advocates was formed. Like somebody mentioned earlier, you have to have people with disabilities involved. So they've been a force in Vermont since '94. And then our collaboration continues today. We had during the grant days, we had a lot more training and technical assistance from the University of Vermont. And with the recession, that kind of went away. But I'm happy to say we've got a contract with the state again. So we're providing training and technical assistance to the University of Vermont once again. And a lot of it, as I mentioned, just so we did have strong leadership. We were very fortunate. So the policies were shaped by the philosophy that presumes, employment is right for everybody if the right supports are provided and they can be successful. Segregated and substandard wage models were deemed undesirable and eventually terminated. So we've really focused on person-centered planning, employer engagement, meaningful job matches, creative strategies to build inclusion in Vermont's workforce. So those that have been historically excluded from the workforce became employed. Obviously, the impact of the policy and practice of inclusive employment for people with disabilities is obviously, increased, income, sense of contribution and skill acquisition, confidence, independence, social connections, all enable people to develop meaningful careers and lives. And then equal benefits with the employers and the community. Once people are out and about, and not segregated in facilities, sort of see and be seen. So employers and the community benefit from the social inclusion and diversity of people with disabilities. And they contribute to the workforce through improved morale, customer loyalty, and overall productivity and presence. And there's a lot more recent research showing that it is beneficial, for businesses' bottom line to hire people with disabilities. So overall, Vermont's performed pretty well compared to the national average. So the national average, 19-20% right now. And ours, we've reached 49%. Some agencies have reached 70% employment for their population. And again, no sheltered workshops. And as we've moved away from segregated settings, we've been able to put our energy and efforts and resources into other programs. So we're having a lot more transition and post-secondary options developed in Vermont. Pat mentioned civil rights earlier. I hope you've heard this news, but the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights has been looking at subminimum wage for people with disabilities. So a number of us testified in Washington, D.C. in 2019. And then the commissioners did a site visit to Virginia and Vermont. And they were pretty impressed with Vermont services, because we've got rid of sheltered workshops and we're very inclusive in our employment and post-secondary ed. And they came back with a very strong recommendation to phase out 14C and subminimum wage and gradually close sheltered workshops. So that was a big movement, well, for Vermont and also nationally. So hopefully that will be made into law. So these are examples, some of the programs that we've developed, since we got away from segregated sheltered workshops. So we have university programs like our Think College program at the University of Vermont. College Steps is a similar program in other colleges in Vermont. The Howard Center has a Succeed program, which is has a focus on transitional living and post-secondary ed. And then we have 3 Project Search programs that work with high school students in transition. And then the Global Campuses Foundation, which is a lifelong learning program for people with developmental disabilities in Vermont. So we put a lot of our time and energy and effort into these programs, which are being very successful. So Part of that, the partnership I mentioned earlier on in the early 80s, the University of Vermont Developmental Disabilities and Voc Rehab. So the three presenters today are representing those agencies, and Jenny, James, and I have actually worked together for at least 25 years here in Vermont. So our collaboration and partnership continues, and I'll turn it over to Jenny.
I'm just trying to start my video here. I think Brian, maybe you need to close your video before I can start mine.
Oh, do I?
And I don't need to be on the video, but you're still showing if you want to close out.
Okay.
Stop share.
Stop video.
Okay.
But I'll still share my screen because.
Yes, and would you move the slides too? Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here today. Thanks for inviting us. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've designed our structure of supported employment services and how we've shaped our funding over the years to support the best possible services that we hope to be able to provide to folks. So in Vermont's developmental service system is really founded on the state and the providers and consumers having really close working relationships. Lots of meetings happening all the time between those three stakeholder groups. The state division approves providers through a designation process. What that means is that we don't have private providers in Vermont. We have the designated system where each county has an agency that's funded through our division. And they need to they are required to adhere to all of our standards and our guidelines and our policies and our values. The beauty in that is that because there's one designated agency in each county, anybody who is eligible for services and has a developmental disability is going to be served by that agency if they want to be. So no agency can turn a person away. They are compelled to serve all people for any of the services that person is eligible for. So that makes a very complete system in Vermont. We also ask and require that each of our designated agencies has a well-formed, effective supported employment program, which we fund. And within that program, both rehab and developmental services come together and meet regularly, usually monthly, with the programs. We have a community of practice where all of the leaders of those supported employment programs come together and meet with us once a month. They help to shape the agenda. It's professional development for them and mentoring, cross-mentoring, as well as us at the state understanding what their stresses or challenges are and looking to serve them as well. So the actual system that I've just described is also predicated on the belief that all individuals should be in charge of their services, should be guiding their services and choice, and also be provided opportunities to be steering the type of career path that they want for themselves. You want to change the slide, Brian? Next slide. So in Vermont, these are a few aspects of our supported employment model or structure that we believe have helped us to expand employment for people in Vermont over the years. The first is that we use our home and community-based services waiver and our Voc Rehab funding in Vermont to co-fund all of supported employment services, or at least we have traditionally. And what that really means is that this combined funding comes together to support those dedicated supported employment programs that I just described. And it allows for the program to have the full complement of staffing that they're going to need to provide the full menu of supported employment services to each job seeker. So again, it assures that the personnel are in place, but it also assures that there's a full menu, meaning that the Voc Rehab funding can contribute to the upfront services like needs assessment, job development, job exploration, work experience. And then the home and community-based service waiver will continue for that same individual and provide the long-term support, the job site supports, the retraining, and the employer development over time, and the employment enhancement as well. So in other words, basically the consumer doesn't really understand or see that there's two funding mechanisms at hand here. It's a process that happens sort of behind the curtain, but in real time, the person, the job seeker, is receiving all the services that the two systems would offer, but in one place. So it's sort of a one-stop shopping kind of situation for the job seeker. Next slide. So in 2009, we established our post-secondary ed initiative in Vermont. Brian listed out those programs a minute ago. And we do consider the post-secondary ed initiative part of our supported employment initiative or employment services. It's really been a driver for increasing people's access to employment. They're typically two-year programs across different colleges in Vermont. And not only has it increased the employment rate in Vermont, but it's been a real transformational experience for the students that participate in post-secondary ed, typically coming out with much better job prospects than they would have not going to college. We've also developed financial incentives for our agencies to improve their employment outcomes and to help move people to go to work. So when supported employment programs in Vermont achieve particular benchmarks, we're able to give them bonuses and reward them for that work that's done. And in 2012, we established expectations that all of our agencies will aspire toward a 45% employment rate for all consumers served. I would say right now, 8 of our 14 employment providers have above a 50% employment rate. Next slide. So just to sort of recap, there are 4 key elements that we see as being very beneficial to our ability to continue to move employment services along in Vermont and to expand and to hopefully deepen the experiences for people. The first would be what I think of as access, and that is, again, the requirement that every designated agency has a supported employment program within its agency. This is really a cornerstone of enduring supported employment services in Vermont. What it means for the individual is that no matter where you reside in Vermont, you will have access to the full range of supported employment services. So that type of parity is really important to us. We talked a bit about the braided funding, combining the voc rehab and the developmental services funding to provide that full menu of services. Again, this provides the staffing that's necessary to do the work. And again, it provides that one-stop shopping for the consumer. And then leadership is very important to us, and leadership concepts around servant leadership and everybody working together, pulling towards the same mission or vision. So leadership and effective circles of support in supported employment services is of great value to us. We try to nurture those teams, we try to provide professional development, and we do ask agencies to be hiring people in leadership positions in employment who can be mentors to their staff and who can be skilled at developing highly effective teams. And then the fourth sort of key element that is important to us, again, is that voc rehab developmental service teaming. So both at the central office state level, we come together once a month to strategize and to plan and to problem solve. And then at the local level, there are agreements and collaborative efforts between the local voc rehab offices and the local designated agency offices. And they typically meet at least once a month and sometimes more. Next slide, please. So in Vermont, we have a really long history of investing not only money, but investing in best practice and training, professional development, and really keeping our attention on employment services, even through change in leadership at the state level, change in governors. We've, I think, done a really good job of really paying attention to employment over the decades. In 1985, we formed a contract with the University of Vermont and had that contract with them for 20 years. And basically,
Did Jenny freeze there? Brian, I think we lost Jenny.
Yeah, Jenny looks like she got dropped.
I'm back. I'm here.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm happy to say that we just executed another contract with UVM USID, so they will be again doing the professional development, the training, and the consulting with our provider agencies. So that's really exciting. We're very, very pleased to be able to do that. In 1993, we closed down our only institution, the Brandon Training School, and that's when we really aligned all of our guidelines and policies with Person First and community, full-on community-based services. At that time, too, a lot of people coming out of the Brandon Training School to live in the community were asking for employment, so we expanded employment services then. And then in 2002, as Brian indicated earlier, we closed our last sheltered workshop and infused new funding into that agency so they could build up a supported employment program, converted all of the fiscal resource that was being used for the sheltered workshop into that employment program. And today they are a flagship and responsive employment program. They're a real leader in the state. And then in 2003, we required that all programs, all employment programs, use the blended funding model to maximize personnel resource and to be able to provide that full continuum of employment service. Change the slide, please. Okay. Thank you. So in 2003, we stopped funding congregate work. We placed a strong prohibition on any state funding, whether it was we were Voc Rehab, was certainly willing to cooperate with us around this, but we placed a prohibition on any state funding being used for any type of congregate work, and that included work groups in the community. So everything became competitive employment in 2003. And I will say we didn't have a lot of that going on at the time. We had 3 work enclaves at 3 large companies in Vermont, and we worked with those providers to help thoughtfully and carefully move those individuals into competitive employment. In 2012, we put out the aspirational target of a 45% employment rate, asking all of our providers to aspire to that. And the employment rate in Vermont is basically based on the number of people working compared to the number of people receiving any service at that agency. So it's not the number of people receiving employment services, it's the actual number of people who are in jobs at a given time. And then our most recent data is that we've just reached a 49% employment rate in 2019. Next slide. So when we were converting the workshop to supported employment services, or when we looked to help build up or expand an existing supported employment program, these are some of the partners that we've looked to as really strong partners at the table. We have developmental services and Voc Rehab at the top of the list there come together with mutually shared values and philosophy and funding and oversight. UVM, USID, is able to provide the professional development, the best practice, the individualized consultation with agencies, the providers and the families of the stakeholders to serve and also to collaborate with, as well as to listen to and to find out how we as a system can best serve those two stakeholders. Our DV Law project in Vermont has been very helpful over the years with Social Security, SSI issues, and employment law. And we work very closely meeting with our agency of education every few months in improving youth transition services into employment. We work with self-advocates. They inform us about their desires, their concerns, their interests, where they want us to be headed. And of course, our DD counselor we're involved with as well. And oftentimes when we're helping to mentor employment services in the state, we'll pull in a successful employment program as part of that mentoring. It really takes a village, and we all work together in Vermont to help various programs. Next slide. So over the years, we have put a lot of effort into building trust and rapport, and it really has made all the difference in our efforts and success because it's really what keeps us all working together. And we see how effective collaboration between the state funders and the providers leads to a shared vision with clear outcomes. We don't want to work against each other. We want to work together. We need to hear when things are working well, when they're not working well. We're always inviting our providers to tell us what they need. Sometimes we can help, sometimes we can't. And we want providers to appreciate and to implement the values and the goals for supporting employment that we have. So it's really a two or three-way street here. So when we have those things coming together, we can easily work on developing strategic planning. We know the providers well enough to be able to select promising pilot regions. The trust allows the providers to see that we as funders are committed to endured funding, to funding that goes on for the long term. And the collaboration on implementation of new ideas usually can happen fairly easily. So that trust really allows outcomes for funding. It opens up a dialogue about what is possible for the people that we serve. Next slide. So not only do we want to invest in supporting employment providers, but we want to invest in the future and for the long term. So after workshop conversion, or when there's a new supported employment program startup, or an employment program needs help, it's important for us to design ways to share resources across the state. We do that often through numerous communities of practice. We call them different things, but they all end up being communities of practice. We pull in the experts from the field to assist others and to mentor others. We want to absolutely create funding models that are dependable and can endure for the long term. That is why we moved away from fee-for-service many years ago, decades ago, and basically provide infrastructure grants, which allows providers to count on a budget that will provide the staffing that they need from year to year, as opposed to staffing ratios going up and down. Next slide. And then when we did close down that last sheltered workshop in Vermont we recycle money often. So what that means is that we'll take an allocation that was allocated for one use, and then over time, as different needs emerge, we'll recycle those same dollars to be used in different ways. So when we helped close down the last workshop, the state was at the table almost every week for a while, adjusting group rates to individualized budgets so that each person coming out of the sheltered workshop could have the appropriate level of support that they were going to need to go to work. And we provided general fund dollars to build up that base program, to be able to add in the additional non-direct staff like managers and job developers, community development people. Both rehab came to the table and assisted in funding job development personnel. And at that time, we did have Medicaid infrastructure grant, which was also awarded to that agency for 2 years. But the point here, I think, is that we want to use all available funding mechanisms to convert from group to competitive employment, or in expanding or building any employment program. Next slide. I'm not sure if this is helpful today or not, but also I'll just move through it quickly. But one thing we've talked with other states often about is the state VD plan, and that is the plan that a state writes and Center for Medicaid Services accepts as your plan for which services are going to be reimbursed by Medicaid. So many, many years ago, long ago in Vermont, we decided that we wanted the full menu of employment services. We wanted any activity that would be needed to assist a person to go to work to be reimbursable by Medicaid. So I've only pulled out just a few pieces of that. It's quite a long list of services that we offer and pay for. But it would be, I think it really behooves any state to take a look at that plan and see what's missing, if anything is missing. So for example, transportation seems to be a weak link sometimes. We in Vermont included transportation as part of a appropriate supported employment service definition long ago, as well as long-term follow-along, travel training. And again, these are all reimbursable by Medicaid. So it's important to also consider what you're going to need for individuals to get to work. We live in a rural state, and we spend a lot of money on transportation every year, but we feel that it's valuable and that it's necessary. And the last slide, Brian. Other parts of our Medicaid plan that are reimbursable, that make for that full menu of service that I've mentioned a couple of times now, is the ongoing support that's both on and off the job site. I believe that some states do not reimburse for off-job site supports, but we do. So if a person needs some help before going to work for a few hours, then that's an appropriate supported employment service. And then, of course, the long-term follow-along at the job site is also something that's important for us and maybe for others. And that also helps VR by assuring VR that those long-term supports are in place as they open people. So education with coworkers, with managers, supporting and interacting with the individual, transportation supports, those are all key components of our supported employment Medicaid waiver. I'd also, I guess, wrap up by saying if we didn't provide all of these supports within the supported employment waiver, I think it would be safe to say that we probably would not have a 49% employment rate. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over now to James Smith.
Hi, thanks, Jenny. So I'm going to just try and be quick and talk about this from the VOC rehab perspective. But first, I actually wanted to just answer a question I saw in the chat, which I think is really important. The question I saw in the chat was, what about the other 51% of the folks we're serving? And so the way I look at this, and I looked at this back then when we sort of set these targets, was if you look at the general population of working age people, depending on the state, about between 70 and 80% of people are employed. So the other 20 to 30% are all the folks who are not working in many cases because out of choice. They're choosing to be a stay-at-home parent. They are in education, or they're just choosing, they're early retired, or they're just choosing not to work now for whatever reason. So when I think about our success to date, I think 49% is a good number. Ideally, we would be at the 70 to 80% rate that would be the same as the rest of the Vermont working age population. So I just thought it was important to respond to that. So we are we think we're doing well, but we're certainly not there. Okay, so I'm just going to try and talk about how VR policy and practice and funding, most importantly, can help competitive integrated employment. So as has been said many times over in this presentation, we have worked hard to blend VR core funding with home and community-based Medicaid waiver funding in partnership with our developmental services division. We also really try to support the use of individual case service funding. So for all those additional things like work clothes, tools, transportation, whatever other ancillary supports are necessary. The other thing that we try to bring to the table is vocational rehabilitation in Vermont has made a tremendous investment in benefits counseling for folks on SSI and SSDI. It's just a crucial component to helping people return to work. And we're the WIPA provider for the state, for those folks familiar with WIPA. But we also use VR $110 to pay for 6 in-house benefits counselors. And those benefits counselors are assigned to each of the designated agencies and work with folks in that system. The other thing I think we're in our state anyway, VR is an aggressive applicant for all sorts of demonstration projects, and it's a great way to change systems, we find, and help support change. I think in some ways we're often better placed than our DDSD partners to apply for grants for a variety of reasons. But it's great to bring in extra resources to the table. But as Jenny said time and time again, I think more important than anything is that we share a vision with our partners in DDSD, that everyone we share the vision of integrated competitive employment for everyone that we serve. Next slide, please. So just I'm going to bore the VR people on the call here, but some VR basics, just for those who are not familiar with Voc Rehab, we only have actually one funding stream that's dedicated to supported employment, which are Title 6B funds. And that's actually, it's very limited and is fairly restrictive. So I don't know how much Indiana gets, but our total allotment is about $290,000. Not a lot of money. By far the largest chunk of VR funds are our basic core 110 funds. And those are the funds where we have far more discretion in providing VR services, including supported employment services. So one of the things I think it is challenging and important for VR agencies and our developmental services partners to consider is what chunk of our core funding could be assigned to supporting people with developmental disabilities. And that's something that should be outlined in our state plan. It's something that we should be working with our partners around. Obviously, as an agency, we have a responsibility for all disabilities in the state, but we have to figure out how we're going to support folks with developmental disabilities. And then finally, the chunk of funds that we can never use for supported employment are pre-employment transition funds, which is basically about 15% of our total federal award. But those funds can only be used for high school students who are on IEP or the 504. However, even though you can't provide individualized supported employment services, it can be helpful in terms of providing services to students in school, especially work-based learning experiences for students and students with developmental disabilities in particular, as that kind of preparatory step before they go into the transition period. Next slide, please. This is a little repetitive, but I think it's worth saying is for a very long time we've had a close partnership with our developmental services division. including blending of funds. But really importantly, we assign designated counselors to work with each of our designated agency supported employment programs. So there's one counselor that those programs can work with to not just to access VR funding to support employment, but to access all those ancillary supports, including payment for work clothes, but also payment for even skills training or credential training. The other thing I think we do very successfully is VR and developmental services jointly monitor services and program outcomes. So we're never pulling programs in different directions. We're always speaking with the same voice. And we work, if we're in disagreement, which over 35 years, we've had a lot of disagreements, we never do that in front of the agencies. We work it out behind the scenes and then present a united front to the agencies. Next slide, please. So, I would, if I was in VR leadership in a state that was struggling with, and I'm not saying Indiana is struggling, but if I was in a state where, maybe things weren't as smooth as they should be, I think some of the strategies I would use at the local level would be for developmental services programs and VR programs to get to know each other at the local level and really look for opportunities to partner around individual consumers and looking at small scale pilots. Then at the state level, I just think it's really important for the leadership to talk regularly. And not just talk when there's a problem, but have a regularly scheduled meeting where you're anticipating issues. If I was your developmental services state unit in a new state, I'd want to find out how VR is assigning its 6B funds and its 110 funds and what's in their state plan. VR agencies have a responsibility in our state plan to describe how we're going to support employment programs. And again, if things are not where they should be, looking at pilot opportunities is usually a very effective way to go. Next slide, please. So today, as Jenny mentioned, things have fluctuated and changed, and VR a few years went through a huge financial crunch, and so we had to change our funding structure, and now we're sort of changing it back again. So things do change, but because we have an ongoing relationship, we can figure those things out without undermining programs. Our role today is that we're currently funding services for students and young adults, students in high school and young adults with developmental disabilities, to try to get them employed before they exit high school. We think that's just a key piece. And within our state's our developmental services funding system, if a student exits schools with a job, they automatically are eligible for supported employment funding. So it's a great motivator for us to help them get there. VR and our developmental services partners, we work together to jointly fund post-secondary programs such as College Steps and Project Search. And we are hugely committed to that effort. As I mentioned, we provide benefits counseling. We currently have joined a community of practice with ICI to try and develop new leadership and a new innovation within our programs. And then we VR are work very closely with Jenny and her team to actually properly calculate the number of folks employed in the state, which is much easier said than done. Because you have to use a range of administrative data sources to actually get an accurate number. But just, it's one of the few things that the state that we measure really consistently, and it's really helpful. I think those agencies that are under 45% target, that's it. It's a motivator to get them to change practice. Next slide, please. So, and you're probably breathing a sigh of relief. This is my last slide. So the future of Voc Rehab, and again, if my VR colleagues on the call probably very familiar with this, but the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act actually really dramatically changed the VR program in what I think are some really positive ways. And we need to make sure that folks with developmental disabilities are definitely benefit from these changes and are not excluded from these changes. So the first very positive thing it did is it really tightened up the definition of competitive integrated employment, including supported employment. And I think well, we're not quite there yet. I think it's very hard for a VR program to invest now in anything that's not leading towards competitive employment because of that strengthening of that definition. And there was quite an effort to push back on that definition and change it back to something more friendly to sheltered, to sub-minimum wage settings. But the last time I looked, that seems to be holding firm, which makes me very happy. The other thing that the way VR is measured, we used to be measured just on job placements, and that was fine, but it was sort of limiting in that it kind of didn't matter whether we got someone a minimum wage job for 5 hours a week or we got someone a job making $100,000 a year. But now we're very clearly measured, not just on that people are employed, that how much are they earning? Are they retaining their jobs after 2 quarters, 4 quarters? We're really being measured on those areas. And so it's really pushing the VR program to look at, and we're also measured on the number of our customers who are achieving credentials, industry recognized credentials, academic credentials. So these are really good things because so many of our customers historically have been, and I'm generalizing, but to make a point here, but certainly in Vermont, we have customers who just come back and return to us and they go back into entry-level employment and they never really get out of that cycle of poverty. And the re-emphasis of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is really telling us we need to get those folks into credential trainings. We need to get them into jobs that are sustainable, that they can retain, and that they can make a living from. And then finally, the final huge big change is the introduction of pre-employment transition services and the requirement that we spend 15% of our money on high school students has radically changed the population we served. 5 years ago, about 30% of our customers were under 24. Now 50% are, and that I understand is a national trend. So most VR programs are becoming more youth focused. And I think, again, that presents an opportunity because we definitely do not want students graduating from high school into sheltered work settings. And VR has a huge role in that. And we need to be transitioning students into competitive integrated employment. We need to prepare them in high school through work-based learning experience in real competitive settings, and then getting them into employment prior to high school exit. So the only worry I have is when we talk about credentials and higher wage employment is that VR programs might say, well, we have, that doesn't include people with developmental disabilities, or that doesn't include people in supported employment programs. That is just not true. That's not the way to look at this. We have to be inclusive, and we have to make sure those opportunities are available to everyone we serve. And I will wrap it up there, and thanks very much for having us.
Hey, thank you all so much for sharing that excellent information that highlighted so many important components of systems change and state and local processes. So we have a lot of questions in the chat room, and we're going to need to go through these pretty quickly. So maybe we can have each of you take whatever one makes the most sense for you. So we're going to go back to that question about what do the 51% who are not employed do during the day?
Pat, this is Jenny. Would you like me to try to answer that?
Please, yeah. Any of you jump on in any of the questions.
So the 51% who are not employed are all people who are receiving other services at their designated agencies. Many of those individuals have residential support, live in their own apartments, live with shared living providers. Many people in Vermont have community inclusion supports up to 25 hours a week. People who live with natural families have respite, and they can manage that respite in a way that makes sense for them. So the 51% remaining do have services. Just want to make that clear that they do have services that are based on their individual needs. So everybody in Vermont has a needs assessment, and that needs assessment is what derives the service or the number of hours of service each week that they'll be allotted. Anybody who has community supports, and again, we have double the number of people using community supports than we do employment. And we encourage that anybody with community supports can at any time convert those community supports to employment. And we have a pretty easy way to help people do that. So that's an initiative that we have called the Community to Employment Conversion Initiative. So again, anybody with those supports could go to work if they wanted to, and we would work with an employment program to help them find the job or to locate an appropriate job match. I hope that's helpful.
It's helpful, Jenny. The next question is, what about the people who don't get a waiver?
This is Jenny again. If a person does not receive a Medicaid waiver, it's because there were no urgent needs going on in their needs assessment. So a person will receive a waiver based on different funding criteria that we have. And the funding criteria is based on, different levels of need, if you will. So for people who don't have a waiver and want to work, we also have infrastructure funding in each of the employment programs so that those individuals could be assisted with a job search. And we do have some time-limited resources within the employment programs to help those individuals go to work and receive the job site supports that they need.
So I'd like to jump in on that one too. Again, I want to disabuse you of the notion that in Vermont we have the perfect system. No state is perfect, and we definitely aren't. There definitely are people out there with developmental disabilities who need supported employment that don't get it, and it's purely a resource issue. And unfortunately, like every system, VR and DS we have only so many resources. So that is just, I think, the reality of it.
Yeah, for sure. Here's the question. Is Vermont's VR operating under an order of selection?
Yes, we are. But pretty much anyone served in our developmental services program would be in our open categories, category 1 and category 2. So it's not really been an issue.
But for other populations, probably yes, an issue.
I'm sorry?
I was suggesting that perhaps it is an issue then for other populations seeking VR services.
Yeah.
Yeah. This next question is, are you finding employment at other levels, at levels other than entry level? And second question is, what is the duration of follow along after placement?
I think we are finding better jobs than just entry level. We've been doing a lot of training on job development and employer engagement, and trying to get people to kind of look outside the kind of the obvious, what Griffin Ham has called the big sign syndrome of kind of being more creative in job development and joining the Chamber of Commerce and kind of finding those hidden jobs. And I think just because of the progress in Vermont, that employers are more used to us knocking on the door now. They know about supported employment. They know that there aren't sheltered workshops. And I think our employers over the years have just become a lot more accepting of people with disabilities. And James, maybe you could speak about the business account managers, because that's a way that they've kind of localized in contacting employers.
Sure. So in Voc Rehab, we've created positions that are pure. All they do is employer engagement. They don't carry a caseload. They do generic employer engagement, marketing and it's intended to support all our partners. So not just VR customers, but well, in most cases, TS customers are VR customers, but to broaden the pool of potential employers. The other thing we've recently had success with is helping people find career ladders within their existing job. So kind of like, if someone, a really simple example, if someone's been stocking shelves in a grocery store for 10 years, helping that person, if they want to work in the bakery, which is a better job, maybe pays $15 an hour instead of the Vermont minimum wage, that scheduling an on-the-job training opportunity or a work experience in that career ladder within the job, so folks who can advance into higher wage jobs, just like most of us do. We don't go directly into our dream job. We often climb the career ladder, within a job that we entered at an entry level, and so trying to support people in those patterns.
Yeah, for sure. That's so important. So we have probably more questions than we have time, but one was just, do you have, at the tip of your tongue, the average number of hours worked per week for those who are employed?
This is Jenny. I don't have that on the tip of my tongue. Our database that we use to average out the hours is very archaic, and we're not really confident in the data that we're getting out of that particular data set. We do know that there's a broad band of individuals that are working anywhere from 15 to 20 hours a week. We do have individuals who are working full-time, and we do have a lot of individuals who are working small jobs, and they might be individuals that might easily be labeled as unemployable in other states, but we assist everybody to go to work regardless of their challenges. And typically individuals who have, maybe 15 hours of community time a week might want to split it between community and employment. So there's also decisions to be made about the level of support you're going to get at the job site based on your total hours a week of service that you get. But I'm sorry, I don't have an accurate number to give you.
We may send you a list of some of the remaining questions. But I know, given that Vermont is predominantly a rural state, maybe the last question, which several people asked, was about transportation. And, do you have a centralized transportation case management service, or do they contract with local vendors? Any other information you want to wrap with about transportation challenges and community employment and how
so
you...
Because we are a rural state and we have very little public transportation, and people live long distances from their jobs, sometimes 40-minute drives, 30-minute drives. Long ago, we made a decision to wrap transportation as a reimbursable Medicaid waiver service into the supported employment waiver. So any person who gets a supported employment waiver and support is also going to get transportation for that job site. And in Vermont, what we do is we ask all support staff to provide the transportation with their private vehicles. And that's how we get people around in Vermont. So there's a lot of that happening every day.
Well, with that, we need to let you go, but thank you so much. So many questions, and we'll be sure to follow up with you and get the responses to our attendees. So kudos to you for all the great innovative work you're doing, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks.
Okay. So our next speaker is going to wrap up our day of presentations prior to moving you all into your discussion forums. And I'm really pleased to introduce Kelly Mitchell, who's the CEO and president of the Southern Indiana Resource Solutions Service, or SIRS. And she's led SIRS as president and CEO since 2003. Prior to that, Kelly served as a direct support professional, case manager, and human resource director. Her career in community work has focused on developing unique person-centered strategies to build inclusive communities and to support individuals living their best life. Kelly played key roles in launching First Steps, rural public transit, sheltered work conversion, employment services, and consumer-directed services. So Kelly, we are so pleased to have you with us today. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen.
And Kelly, you might need to increase your volume.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Well, thank you for that warm welcome. It's very exciting to follow the last presentation. I was copiously taking notes. Just very, very intrigued by that. I also want to add, in the room with me today is Mr. Bob Jasper. Bob is joining me. He currently lives in Tell City. He and a friend share an apartment. And the reason Bob is with me today is that Bob joined SIRS as a participant in a sheltered work program in Ferdinand, Indiana, back in the 1970s. And he worked there up until the time that we went through our conversion in the late 1990s. So here in a little while, I'm going to have Bob share his story after we hit a few highlights. And Bob knows he can jump in whenever he would like.
Yeah.
Bob tells me he loves to garden, and I know he likes to bowl. And he loves working, even though he could retire. He has no intention of doing so anytime soon. So, Bob, you want to say hello to everyone?
Hello, everybody.
So thank you very much. Again, we're going to talk today about our transition from sheltered workshop. I call this a journey to community because we're continuing to figure it out as we go along. We don't have it perfect yet, and it's constantly in motion. Before I get started, I just wanted to give you a brief idea of who we are. We've been around for a little over 50 years. Each year we serve around 300 waiver and VR customers. That waxes and wanes, just depending. We have around 230 employees and a budget that's between $8.5 and $9 million per year. We're set up as a nonprofit. We were formed as a traditional community rehab provider back in the late 60s. We have a lot of moving parts. We do supported living, respite, community connections, music therapy, employment services. We still do have what we call SIRS Industries, a manufacturing piece. It is not utilized to deliver services, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. We're a First Steps network provider. We have about 38 therapists on staff. We're also a partner in rural public transportation and Medicaid provider of transportation services. And we do have some limited day programs. I stress that it's small, and I'll talk about that a little later as well. Yep.
I am that day.
We do have that, don't we? So if you look at then and now, we sure do look a whole lot different. For our first 20 some odd years, we basically were a sheltered work and day activity program. We were very much facility based. We did offer some preschool and infant stimulation, but again, that was facility based. Today, as I just said, it's really about services wrapping around individuals rather than programs. We've tried to move away from the idea of placing people into programs and looking at the individual. So as we talk about our decision to move away from facility-based congregate sheltered work services, many of you might ask, why would we make such a decision so very long ago? Our transition started to occur in the 90s. And a lot of that was that in 1987, when I joined the organization, we were one of the first few pilots of the state to offer supported employment services. And we immediately in leadership began to see that we were in a conundrum. On one hand, we were asking employers and telling employers that we should hire individuals, and on the other, we were saying we need to bring work in because people with disabilities need to work here in the sheltered workshop. So we found ourselves in a bit of a philosophical conundrum. And we also began to explore and research best practice, and we knew that we wanted something more for the people that we served. And in truthfulness, as we prepared for the future, and I think I heard others mention this in the previous presentation, there really were some warning signs. There was a capacity issue. We had limited space and limited work, and people kept coming in to sheltered work. So what was 20 people grew to 40 people, grew to 60 people, to 80 people. And what we began to see is maybe 20 of those people were active all the time, but the other 40 spent a lot of time doing simulated work or reading through magazines or doing other things. So a handful of people were really getting opportunities. And the other was looking at our manufacturing expertise. We asked ourselves, is this really where we should be focusing our resources, and is this our mission? It really wasn't our area of expertise. And how would we remain competitive in a world that was changing? It would take a lot of investment in technology. A lot of the jobs that we traditionally held, which were piece work and bench work, assembly type things, were disappearing. But there were some hindrances. We were looking at, well, people are happy. Nobody's complaining. The financials are good. Why do we want to rock the boat? Yeah. And so we balanced there for 3 or 4 years, recognizing that we had some fears about what the future might be if we decided to take this journey. Bob, you're nodding your head. Do you remember those days?
Yeah. They used to make air wicks too.
Yeah, you made Bob's saying air wicks. You made air wicks and mops and things like that way back when, right?
Long time.
So what happened for many of us in leadership, and I think what has to happen for a lot of people, is that we have our own aha moments. And for me, it was a young man named Chris, and I happened to be a case manager at the time. And he went through an old model of evaluation. We had our own evaluator, and they went through a week or 2 week services and evaluating their ability to work and whether they were ready to work and what their problems were and how we might fix them. And this young man came out of evaluation, and basically our evaluator said he needed to be in sheltered work. He lacked judgment and impulse control. So he got placed in sheltered work. But within a few months, a visionary that I worked with, her name was Pat Scott, one of our first employment consultants, and I really started to question why. It's like, why is this guy here? He doesn't belong here. And my big aha came when I started to talk to the VR counselor, and I said, I really would like to give Chris a chance. Why don't we explore supported employment for him? And in all honesty, I had to promise everything but my firstborn child to get this guy the opportunity to give it a whirl. Well, thank goodness the VR counselor was willing to to take a leap of faith, and we were able to address some of her concerns about risk and family risk. And I'm happy to tell you, 33 years later, this guy has worked full-time his entire life. He eventually got his driver's license. He has a girlfriend. He lives on his own, and we're actually getting ready to. He doesn't really need us anymore at all for any reason in his life. So that was just an aha moment for me, and I had many others. And we started to explore our history. It said when we were founded that Sheltered Work, the whole purpose was to bring people in and train them so that they could get a job somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But you never got to leave, did you?
Nope.
No. Guess what? No one ever left. We were just training all the time. But they weren't employees. You weren't getting benefits and a full wage, and weren't very big paychecks back then, were they, Bob? So, and we would really told ourselves and told individuals we served and families that we knew how to do this, and we could keep people safe. So once we made the decision, then we began to move forward. But this really didn't happen overnight. It was a long journey. 1991, we decided to embark on the journey. 5 years later, after a little bit of exploration, we said, we're never going to get off center until we say nobody new's coming into Sheltered Work. So we stopped. 1996, that's it. Nobody new's coming in. We didn't kick anyone out that was there, but we were working really hard on discovery and exploration and trying to get folks jobs. But in all honesty, there were just some folks that was comfortable. It really, for us, I'm just going to be honest, it was often a path of least resistance. It was the easiest course of action for us. So it was a strategic process. We had to figure out how to do business because our model was based on facilities. We owned several, and everything we did was around those facilities, and those were our investments. And we had about 160 to 180 people that we were serving in those sheltered sites. We had 3. And it's like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in 1991, we shuttered our first site, the Sheltered Work Service, and in 2004, we closed the last of the 3. So how did we get there? In the early stages, it really took buy-in from the CEO, John Ward at the time. He was our visionary. And we had to bring the board along. And he spent a lot of time exploring and educating the board. And they spent a lot of time exploring best practice. But the long story short is that without governance support and executive leadership support, we would have never been able to make this move. It truly was a big leap for us. It was a total change of how we had previously done business. So after governance and executive leadership was on board, we spent some time educating key internal leaders.
Yeah.
We put together what we called a change management team. There were about 13 or 14 of us. We joined, the previous presenter was talking about some initiatives. We joined the Indiana Employment Initiative back in 1991. I still have such fond memories of that. Connie Farrell spent a lot of time with us, Pat, so many familiar faces. But it took a lot of self-reflection, exploration, and education. And we had to get buy-in from that level of leadership as well. We needed some internal cheerleaders. We had to figure out what our North Star was, right? You can't get to where you're going if you don't know where you're going, right, Bob?
Yeah.
So we worked really hard on where do we want to be? Where are we going? And we'll figure out how to get there, but where do we want to be? And we spent a lot of time listening to folks, and we had to set the date. We had to say, this is where we want to be and when, because we could always find 1,000 reasons why we needed more time and reasons why now wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
We had to put it down. We had to set a target date. So once we had that buy-in at the management level and we had some leadership, then we began the work internally and externally. Not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I'm telling you, we spent a year with leadership. We did best site visits. We went to Florida. We went everywhere under the sun. I went to Oregon. I can't name all the places. Our board members traveled. We brought in speakers, Dale DeLeo, just so many different people, and we spent a lot of time planning strategically. And the other thing that we did is we spent another entire year investing in training in every staff internally, not some, all.
Everyone.
We brought everyone together. And that was quite a feat. It was a little bit of a challenge. We had to be really creative, and we had to have multiple sessions because, as all of you know that are providers of service, still got to deliver on services. So we had to figure out how to bring people on board because we all had to hear the same message, and we all had to be a part of this process. We all had to be involved in making it work. Didn't we, Bob?
Yeah.
Every single one of us. So I've shared these before in some of the presentations I've done, but I think one of the best things we did was listen. And I can't stress that enough. And we did what we called a trust survey, and I'm holding it up right here. I've still got this. This was of all of our executive leadership team. I'm in there. You know, how does your team feel about you? What do they think about your competence, your ethics, your ability to collaborate? And it was revealing.
Yeah.
We needed to hear what our team had to say. We did fear surveys, and I can bring those up later, but these are really simple things that we designed. We asked individuals and families, what was their fear about moving away from sheltered work? And we took that data and we put it in an aggregate form, and we identified 4 to 5 key areas. You know, one was loss of friendship, one was safety, one was loss of activity. And we really began to ask ourselves as a management team moving in this direction, how do we mitigate those fears? And, you know, we'd look, you know, that is legitimate. We need to answer that. We need to address that. And then we also use those for our staff. Guess what? Sometimes our staff were some of the biggest hindrances to this conversion. I still look at my own fear survey from 25, 30 years ago. It was a time for me to be honest with myself. Guess, you know, some of us liked our Monday through Friday 8 to our responsibility ended at 3 o'clock and everybody came to one spot. And some of us were afraid what were going to happen to the people we knew and the relationships we had. So there was a lot of honesty there. And community meetings. It wasn't always fun. I'm going to be honest. I took personally some lashes, as did everyone within the organization. We had funders asking us why we were doing this. I had elected officials. I had a couple call me, and not to offend anyone, but I can remember one who now is a very dear friend and supportive of what we do, call me and say, Kelly, what the hell are you doing? And then I just took a moment to talk to her, and then I was like, oh, that makes sense. So it really was about listening to people, having one-on-one conversations with stakeholders and staff members and small group meetings. Family.
Like my family said, oh, they're making on my own.
Yeah. Your family thought you weren't going to make it on your own, didn't they?
Yeah.
But you proved them wrong, haven't you? But those are very real fears, and we have to understand that and recognize it, but we didn't let the fear stop us. I think the biggest key to our success is the next to the last bulletin, which is the individual planning sessions. You're probably going to hear me say this over and over and over and over and over and over again, but 160 or 180 people all didn't enter sheltered work on the same day or the same week or the same month or the same year, right?
Yeah.
They all got in that service over time. So it was never our intention that we were going to be able to just dump 160 people into the perfect job all in one day. And when we started to talk to people on an individual basis,
Yeah.
and moms and dads and sisters and brothers, and said, what do you want? You know, Bob, we asked you, what did you want?
That's when find me a job.
Yeah.
At Walmart. That ain't torn out there.
Yeah. So you knew you wanted to work, and you knew you eventually wanted to, I remember you wanted to live on your own,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there was things that you wanted to do with friendship. So it really was eating that elephant one bite at a time and wrapping services, not just our services, but services that are within the community and available to all people.
Like
right?
one place for a garden, they got them places that I do.
That's right. There's not just one place to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, I ain't give up though. You ain't give up either.
Nope. You didn't give up, and I didn't give up either. And then after we started this movement, it really was, again, continuing to listen, satisfaction surveys. How were people feeling about their lives? And we asked some genuine questions. Are you getting to do what you want to do? Is your life, you know, we had to measure life being better. And we've gone through different iterations. And
like I went through when my parents passed away, then you all asked me, well, I miss my parents. Yeah, I do.
yeah, when your mom and dad passed away.
Yeah.
So I think it's understanding that things may be good today, but that doesn't mean they're going to be good tomorrow. So it's constant evaluation, and people's lives change. I don't know about any of you, but I'm certainly not the same person I was 10 years ago.
No.
I'm really not the same person I was 20 or 30
No.
years ago. So feedback is key to this. But here's what we also found is when people began to see that we were genuine about this end goal, when we stuck to the date, when we kept moving forward, when we said, guess what, the plant in Ferdinand is closing in November of 1999. Wait, what? No. Because I think people thought we weren't really going to go there, that we were going to find out it didn't happen. So people began to become a little more resistant, and sometimes we identified that we might have had some staff on board that weren't really on board.
Guess who used on that ground? My brother-in-law sold to the city, and then you all bought from the city.
Yep, your brother-in-law. So we had to address that. We had to, again, I always say Patty Ozer, many of you may know her, but she was worked for us for 40 years, just, again, a true visionary. You mentioned her earlier, how much you miss her. But there were days that Patty and I were one another's cheerleaders. I was like, Patty, I don't know if I can do it anymore. I feel like I've hit my head up against this wall so many times, and the blood's flowing down over my eyes, and everybody hates me, and she's like, now Kelly, what's the vision? Where are we going? And you need those cheerleaders.
I don't know. Well, I said, when my dad and mom passed, what no? She said, just hang in there.
Just hang in there. So we really had to kind of buckle down, address some of those deep-rooted fears. Funding challenges were real. You know, I talked about why would we have done this when there really wasn't a whole lot of funding to make this happen, and most everybody was still on the sheltered work course those many years ago. And it was easy to waffle even among leadership when we saw the financials dip for a little while, and we could really throw those barriers up. Well, we can't get people to work because of transportation. You know, people aren't open to it. Employers aren't open to it. There's no funding for the ongoing support. And so we had to figure out ways for people to explore and discover and staff and use funding. So what did change? Well, words matter. So number one, there were 3 different iterations of our mission statement over 13 years. We began to look at strategic planning as a living, breathing organism rather than this thing where you come together and you put some papers together that sits on a shelf. We really had to look at our structure. We weren't designed to support this mobile, fluid, individualized service delivery system. We were organized to support people coming to one place. So we flattened the organization by a great deal. We really looked at leadership, by location or small teams and work cells that are built around people. And in fact, we've renewed that focus just recently, taking it to another level, a holistic model, person-centered. We had to revise policies and procedures and job descriptions. We had to be willing to take on some risk and liability. We had to train people differently. We still do this to this day. People spend at least 1 to 2 hours, if not more, in a facilitated session when they hire on. And it really asks them to explore their perceptions about people with particularly developmental disabilities, ask them to role play and work through issues of risk and how we might mitigate risk, and talking about social role valorization. In fact, we just did another huge agency-wide training on social role valorization just pre-pandemic. We're hoping to do that again. And just we brought in Dale Verstegen and did some ACRE certification, focusing on employment and that everyone's employable. And even if they don't get there, how can we move them along the continuum, right? So everybody can work.
Yeah.
And what do we do to move people along that continuum? And we had to really monitor ourselves for that.
Yeah, some people get food stamp. I don't.
You
they
don't.
Say, no, what they say, I make too much.
You make too much money, that's a good thing. Yeah. And then we also had to look at our role of service industries. We did discontinued sheltered work services, but we decided that we were going to continue to operate industries as a way to generate revenue, and we would allow people to apply to work there just as anyone else, regardless if they had disability or not. And if it was truly a good job match and they had the skill level, then we could hire them. And we had 2 or 3 people that chose to do that. To this day, we still have 2 sites that operate. One of our sites, we're just about to phase that out, and it's continually being reevaluated. When I talk about this vision to mission to strategy, I really just wanted to share just an example, and you can see this was back in 2001, but we had to truly ensure that our strategic plan focused on how to address these barriers. It's easy to throw up barriers. It's not so easy to figure out how might we. That's what that HMW stands for. How might we? So how might we knock down that barrier?
Yeah.
And everything should lead to, why are we doing that? Because we wanted to create more opportunities for inclusion within our communities. So eventually, we had to decide to move forward, as I said. We realized the federal and state funding didn't truly support our vision at the time, and we decided that that's all right. We're moving forward. We're not going to be held hostage by the current funding model, because that changes all the time. Mm-hmm. And we had to be true to what we felt our vision and mission was. We also had to eventually accept that there were some people, no matter what we did, they were never going to buy into our vision and philosophy. And we had to be willing to say goodbye to those folks and let them be where they needed to be. And we needed to be okay with that. So we worked a lot in strategic planning. I'm going to tell you, we always brought in an outside facilitator. Our former Lieutenant Governor Sue Elsperman actually helped facilitate this particular strategic plan. But we found we needed an unbiased, non-involved party who could push us to our max and not let us continue to find reasons why we couldn't be successful. So as we identified those barriers and developed strategies, what truly drove us forward was working with every person to identify what their concept, and I want to stress that, their concept of a meaningful day, not hours, was. And we also had to recognize that families had skin in the game. They worried about safety. They worried about friendships and isolation. They wanted some kind of a tangible answer to what was going to be if sheltered work was no more. So we started to look at work, obviously, day program, arts, music, partnerships, planning, and advocacy. But I do want to stress before I move on, it would have been very easy for us to move everyone into a day program. And we could have said we closed the sheltered work, right? It looks good on paper. We closed sheltered work, but we just moved everyone into day program. We decided not to do that. In fact, at one point, and we still debated on an ongoing basis, we considered whether we should operate day programs at all.
We do?
We do still on a very limited basis, as I mentioned earlier. But out of all the people we serve, I think across 5 counties, there are 40 people that come into day program at some given time through the week.
I do.
You go a couple of days to hang out with some friends
2 days
when you're not working. We have some people that come in 1 day a week, but really trying to move away from that, not being judgmental of others, but it was a real concern for us. We didn't really want to create another work activity or faux sheltered work program by just moving everyone into a day program. That's a huge thing for us. We also didn't want to create an easy out for us. As I said, it would have just been very easy to say, yeah, we don't serve anybody in sheltered work anymore. But it actually wouldn't have been truthful if we just moved them over.
Yeah.
Kelly, I'm going to give you a 5-minute warning, okay?
Okay, well, I better hurry up. So, as I said, prior to conversion, it was pretty simple. Afterwards, we're 24/7, lots of employees, lots of individualization. Now, I want to share a few stories. This is why the challenge is worth it. This is Tim, and Tim recently passed away, but he found his dream job at Ditto in Jasper. He worked there for 23 years. And what I want to tell you is a testimony to what employment means to people is when he passed away, he had moved into Indianapolis from his home in Jasper, Indiana, so that family could care for him during his final days. On the day of his funeral, Ditto sales in Jasper closed entirely in honor of him, and several of his team members traveled to the funeral service, and they spoke eloquently of Tim's impact in their life and the friendships that they had developed. Another story is Sam Reed. Sam was another person that Sam's first job was with SERS and sheltered work, and he went on to work at Old National Bank and Fifth Third Bank, and he volunteered at Golden Living Center. He passed away this past year, but I shared his obituary there. He was seen everywhere. He was known by everyone. He even made it on Paul Harvey, talking about his outstanding work ethic. And in the end, he helped care for his aging parents rather than they caring for him. So many other stories. Betty, she worked for 17 years at a nursing facility and dietary. She recently retired, but she still volunteers on a regular basis at the hospital. Betty was going to be with us today. Lyndall worked in our sheltered work in Troy, Indiana. He applied. He builds reels and pallets, and he has a very active social life. And then Trent is a young man who has spent 23 years, who recently, again, no longer relies on SERS for any services, and very independent. So, Bob, do you want to talk about what work has meant to you?
Yeah, I like work that way, keep me something to do, and what I call it, more I keep busy. I don't like sitting around home.
You don't like sitting around home. And what did you tell me earlier, that part of the reason is you like that you've been able to develop so many friends?
And like plus real good, because I get along with them better than Walmart.
Yep. So Bob is another one of those stories. He was with us through the journey, and would you say you're happier now than you were? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And Bob was telling me today some new things that he wants to do and some things we need to focus on. He wants to put out a garden and find some people that are interested in that. So like I said, it's never ending. We just got to keep talking, don't we? So expect some highs and lows. It's not all beautiful, not all perfect. People are excited, then you get pushback. You have people that decide they can't stay with you. I'm going to be honest, we lost a few consumers. Not you, but we had a few that decided they wanted to travel 18 miles to another sheltered workshop. I'd say there were three, four, five of those folks.
My boy John used to be in this workshop a long time ago.
Yeah.
You remember that?
I do. And there will be challenges because it's a different type of demand on you, and it takes a lot of creativity. So the lessons I learned is share your why internally and externally, early and often. Make sure you're measuring the right things.
He been dead 6 years old.
Yeah. Don't let fear stop you, right, Bob?
Yep.
We couldn't let fear of the unknown stop us. Realize that not everyone's going to be on board, and that's okay. Focus on what you're going to do rather than what you're not going to do. Because we got too hung up on, we're not doing sheltered work anymore. What are you going to do? Where are you going? Just keep moving forward. It's not always a straight line. Connie Farrell once told me, she's like, Kelly, your way of getting there is just different than someone else's, but you're still going to end up in the same place.
Yeah.
Don't be so hard on yourself. That every journey is unique.
Yeah.
Bob, your journey isn't like anyone else's, is it?
Like my fans that are on them big.
Yeah.
Guess what? They're wrong.
And don't create another program to replace sheltered work. Base it on individuals. Celebrate your successes, tell the stories. That's why I put those pictures up. And finally, don't lose your way after you make the closure. We had to come back and reevaluate. We got a little complacent after a while. And just like I was telling Bob, we had to come back and revisit people and talk to me about your life and are you happy? And are we really placing people in community, and are we supporting people the way they need to be supported? And so we had to kind of refocus again about 5 years ago, and constantly reevaluating where we want to be. Yeah. So that's what I have for you, but I will tell you the folks that we have working in the community, I put some numbers up there. As of my last quarterly report, their average hourly earnings are $10.61. 86% of the people we have working work 20 plus hours per week. And when we do a 6 months post-exit SERS services, not hired, post-exit SERS, 82% are still working. Yeah. So I think those are some pretty great numbers.
Yeah.
They sure are, Kelly. And it's been an incredible journey for you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for your leadership. It's amazing to have as an exemplar in our state. Bob, so nice to have you join us today. Congratulations on all your success. And you've got some multiple kudos to both of you in the chat room. We are going to let you sign off from your slides, but we'd love for you to stay with us if you'd like. And we are going to transition now to our breakout rooms. Kelly, would you mind stopping to share? Thank you. Perfect. All right. That was really, really, really good. So we are now to the point where our facilitators are going to lead the breakout room conversations for about 20 minutes, or I should say until 4:20. It's just about 4. Yeah, that's 20 minutes. So you have the Employment First plan recommendations already in the chat room for you. as well as a survey that we want each and every one of you to take that focuses on organizational transformation. So the Employment First plan includes those recommendations that I briefly shared in my presentation earlier today. So just to refresh your memories, this is what it looks like. So we have, and these are just a subset of the Employment First plan recommendations for our state or strategies. These three focus in particular on our organizational transformation. So the first one is collecting data to benchmark current performance and to measure progress.
Hey, Pat, this is Susie.
Yes.
We're not seeing the form.
Ah, okay.
Or we're not seeing the document.
Well, I just clicked on it in my slide, so I will just need to orally give that to you then. I don't have it in a share document. The second is to align government policies and funding to promote employment outcomes. And the third is to increase collaboration between the key stakeholders, state agencies, schools, families, and people with disabilities. So I urge you just to go to the link in your chat room and take another quick peek at that if you need to. And then don't forget before you leave today to complete the survey at this second link that's in your chat room. So the instructions for you, once you get into your chat room, your facilitator will make sure to assign a note taker and a timekeeper. You're going to briefly review that Employment First plan if you'd like to have a short chat about that and what you think about those recommendations around organizational transformation. But the bulk of your time is going to go into discussing any additional action steps, for example, what you heard from Vermont and from CSRS. And then finally, you're going to prioritize your top 3 steps for Indiana and in terms of moving forward. And your facilitator will do that for us. So again, a little bit of an abbreviated time, just 20 minutes to complete these activities. And Kelsey, we're ready to go to breakout rooms. All right. We have everybody joining back, and I'm going to ask the host, Kelsey, it looks like I cannot see my shared screen.
Pat, this is Susie. We probably need to ask people to do that survey again when they all come back, because I don't know if everybody got to it.
Excellent. So for those of you, I can see that you've been pulled back from your breakout rooms. Thanks for that robust conversation. If you have not had time to do so, please click on the link for the survey that's in your chat room right now, because during this time we can see the results coming in and would like to share that out with the group. So take a few minutes right now to do that. And I apologize for sending you astray when I was sharing the wrong.
Oh, chat thing went away.
What went away?
Oh, my chat box kept disappearing on me.
Okay, so Susie, are you seeing more of those results coming through?
I see 13, 14. I am.
Good. So while you're dropping those in, I want to make sure that you know what's up for our day tomorrow. And Jeff, hold on one sec. Please come back tomorrow where our focus is on improving Medicaid buy-in and work incentive education. And we've got Annette Shea speaking with us who about Medicaid buy-in across the country, and Brianne Teague and Brian Gilbert speaking with us about Indiana and Medicaid and MedWorks. And then Beth Waldman from Massachusetts is going to be with us, as well as Acacia McGuire Anderson from the state of Oregon. So amazing speakers again. We still are leaving the registration open in case there's others you know of who would like to still register for free for the session tomorrow. Susan, how's it looking?
I think we've got you. If you want me to share my screen, I can show you.
Please do.
All right, can everybody see?
Yep.
Have 20 responses. And this is the breakdown of who's responding. We have service providers, we have state agency personnel, we have people with disabilities, we have family members. We have a college intern for the Governor's Council. That's great. And so far, the top 3 choices are recruit and retention of quality employment professionals. That's great. And then in second place is ongoing information about competitive integrated employment services to educators. So we will gather your information from your sessions and put that all together, and hopefully we can get you tomorrow the first couple sessions and what that information looked like, what people were able to generate.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And if you didn't get a chance to complete the survey, by all means, please do so. And all of the presentation materials will be posted on our Work to Include website, www.worktoinclude.org, after tomorrow. And if you've got any other questions or comments or input after you reflect on today's information, by all means, don't hesitate to get a hold of Susan and I. And in the meantime, check out our social media at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we will look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for your participation today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.